He lived in a quiet neighborhood, one of those places where everyone knew each other by sight but not by story. People waved from their porches, children played in the streets, and life moved slowly, comfortably like a gentle river. In this world, he was just another face blending in perfectly, but behind those calm eyes was a life that few could imagine, a life shaped by danger, discipline, and secrets so heavy that they could have filled a library. His morning started early, long before the sun climbed above the rooftops. The house was small, unassuming but tidy and organized in a way that reflected a mind trained to notice details. The floors were clean, the furniture in its place, and everything had a reason. It wasn't about showing off. It was about order, about control in a world where chaos had once been a constant companion. In one corner of the living room, his dog slept on a worn-out bed. The dog, a strong and loyal companion, was more than a pet. It was a friend, a confidant, a piece of family that had been there through quiet nights and moments that required comfort. He couldn't speak out loud. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb the dog. Mornings began with stretches, exercises that kept his body ready. Though nothing in this peaceful neighborhood required it, still the habits were ingrained as much a part of him as the love he felt for the dog. Breakfast was simple: coffee, toast, eggs. He ate slowly, savoring the calm, the ordinary moments, knowing how fragile peace could be. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Mail trucks rumbled down the streets, sprinklers hissed in the yards, and the occasional car hummed by. It was mundane, safe, predictable, and he treasured it. The dog stirred, lifting its head and giving a soft whine, reminding him that attention and affection were due. He knelt beside it, scratching behind its ears, feeling the warmth of the bond they shared. The dog had a way of understanding without words, sensing moods and feelings, offering comfort when no one else could. He remembered missions, friends lost, and the weight of decisions made in seconds that shaped lives. But here in this small home, there was no war, no danger, no threat. Just him and the dog. Just quiet mornings filled with loyalty and companionship. Neighbors passed by on their morning walks. He greeted them with nods and occasional smiles, small gestures that kept the community connected. People saw him as polite, disciplined, perhaps a little distant. They had no idea of the precision behind his movements or the depth of his experience. He was careful, knowing that appearances were important. In the past, a single misstep could cost lives. Here, a single misstep might just reveal more than he intended. He spent time outside as well, walking the dog along familiar paths. Trees lined the streets, birds sang, and the air smelled fresh, carrying hints of flowers and freshly cut grass. The dog trotted happily, leash in mouth, ears perked, tail wagging. It was a picture of joy, pure and simple, and he felt a swell of contentment that the world he once knew could still exist somewhere. He was aware, though, that safety was a delicate thing, easily disturbed by forces beyond his control. It was a thought he kept in the back of his mind, not to ruin the peace, but to remember the discipline that had defined him for years. Inside the house, there were memories, small mementos that hinted at a life lived fully but secretly. Photographs of people he couldn't name, awards tucked in drawers, letters carefully folded and stored. They were not for pride, but reminders of a past life, a life that had required courage, skill, and sacrifice. Sometimes he would sit in the quiet and let the memories wash over him, feeling both gratitude and pain. Gratitude for surviving, for returning, for finding a place where a man could walk safely in the morning sun. Pain for those who hadn't, for the moments when control had been taken away by chaos and conflict. His evenings followed a similar rhythm. He prepared his meals with care, read quietly, and spent time training with the dog. The routines were simple but deliberate, a reflection of his nature and the life he had chosen to leave behind. Yet he never fully left it behind. The instincts remained sharp, the awareness always alert. A noise outside would cause him to pause, to listen, to assess. Shadows in the street made him consider possibilities, every moment analyzed, every detail noticed. It was both a curse and a blessing, a skill that kept him alive then and kept him vigilant now. Neighbors began to respect him not for what he had done, but for who he appeared to be. A quiet man with a loyal dog, someone who could be trusted in the simple transactions of everyday life. They didn't know about the missions, the operatives, the skills that made him one of the most effective in his field. They didn't know that the world he had survived was filled with decisions that could change the course of lives in an instant. And he liked it that way. Normalcy was precious, fragile, and he protected it fiercely. Sometimes children in the neighborhood would approach, drawn by the dog's friendly demeanor. He would smile, let the dog play gently, and offer quiet guidance. He remembered a time when he could not show weakness, could not allow vulnerability, could not display gentleness. Here he could, and it was healing. The laughter, the simplicity of joy. It reminded him that life had other meanings besides duty and danger. He absorbed it, stored it like a secret treasure, knowing that it was part of the reason he fought so hard to survive his past. The dog became a symbol of the world he wished to keep intact. It was a daily reminder of unconditional love, of loyalty that required nothing but presence and care. He trained it not because it was necessary for survival, but because discipline was part of both their lives. Commands, routines, exercises. They strengthened the bond, kept the mind sharp, and created a rhythm that was comforting. There were moments when he watched it run in the yard, and he allowed himself to relax fully, even laugh at its antics. In those moments, the weight of his former life lifted, if only slightly. Neighbors occasionally asked about his past, curious about the quiet man who seemed so capable but spoke so little. He answered vaguely, offering just enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing truths that could unsettle the delicate balance he had built. People respected discretion, even when they didn't understand it fully. They assumed he had stories, perhaps adventures, perhaps struggles, but none guessed the reality. That reality was hidden, locked away in memories and the muscle memory of skills he could call on at any moment if necessary. Even in solitude, he remained vigilant. Nights were quiet, but he never fully relaxed. He checked locks, scanned shadows, and ran mental exercises to maintain alertness. It wasn't paranoia. It was habit, a survival instinct honed over years of situations where mistakes could be fatal. Yet he never let it dominate his life. The goal was balance, the ability to live quietly without losing the essence of who he was. That balance was delicate, and the dog was a crucial part of it, a living anchor to the world outside his memories. One afternoon, while walking the dog near the park, he noticed a new patrol in the area. He watched them carefully, noting their behavior, tone, and reactions. They were unaware of him, of what he had done or could do. He smiled faintly to himself, a private acknowledgement of the contrast between appearance and reality. The dog sniffed happily at the grass, blissfully unaware of any tension, and he allowed himself a moment of peace. Observing without interfering, he practiced patience, a skill he had learned in the harshest environments. At home, the dog settled into its bed as he prepared dinner. He hummed softly a simple tune and felt the warmth of ordinary life. The house smelled of cooked vegetables and bread. The day faded gently, light spilling from the windows in soft golden hues. He sat at the table, knife and fork in hand, reflecting quietly. Life had brought him to this point, a life of secrecy and skill now paired with routine and care. The contrast was striking, but it was welcome. It was a reprieve, a chance to breathe without fear, and he treasured it deeply. Evenings often ended with him sitting on the porch, dog at his feet, watching the world settle into night. Streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows, and the sounds of crickets filled the air. Neighbors whispered goodnights to each other. Cars drove slowly by, and everything moved at a pace that allowed reflection. He felt a rare contentment, knowing that here, in this quiet suburban life, he had found a place where the horrors of the past could not reach him. And yet he never let his guard down entirely. He reflected on loyalty, honor, and the nature of service. The dog was part of that reflection, a reminder that devotion did not always demand danger, that courage could exist in small acts of care and kindness. He had seen too much to take ordinary moments for granted. He had learned that life could be fleeting, fragile, and precious. Every day with the dog, every walk, every shared meal was a gift, a reaffirmation that survival was not just about skill, but about finding meaning in what remained. And as the night deepened, with stars scattered across the sky and a gentle breeze brushing past the trees, he felt a quiet resolve. The world beyond his yard would always be unpredictable, and challenges could arise without warning. But for now he had this, a home, a loyal companion, and a life lived in careful harmony with the ordinary. He embraced it fully, knowing that this peace was hard-won and worth guarding with every ounce of vigilance and heart he possessed. The day began like any other. with sunlight spilling into the quiet streets and birds calling from the trees. He was up early as usual, preparing breakfast and letting the dog stretch and run in the small yard behind the house. There was a peaceful rhythm to life here, a comfort and routine that kept the shadows of the past at bay. He had learned to treasure these moments, knowing how rare they were. The dog ran circles around him, barking happily, as if it understood that these mornings were a gift. But the calm was about to be shattered. He heard the sound of engines approaching. More than the usual passing cars, and the familiar quiet of the neighborhood felt heavier. From the window he saw uniformed officers walking toward his house, their movements precise but cautious. They carried themselves like they expected trouble, scanning the yards and porches with alert eyes. Something in the air felt wrong. He set down his coffee and went to the window, the dog following him closely, sensing the tension. The officers stopped at the edge of the yard. One of them knocked firmly on the door, the sound echoing in the still morning. He opened the door, keeping his expression calm. The officers explained that they had received reports of suspicious activity in the area. Their voices were polite but firm. He listened carefully, noting every word, every gesture. There was no immediate threat, but their presence was unsettling. He asked questions calmly, trying to understand what had brought them here. Their answers were vague, filled with assumptions rather than facts. As he spoke, the dog moved to stand between him and the officers, its tail low, ears alert. He tried to call it back gently, but the dog sensed the tension and refused. The officers saw only a large dog, potential danger, and a risk that could not be ignored. Words were exchanged, voices rising slightly as misunderstanding began to grow. He explained that the dog was friendly, trained, and under control. The officers insisted on a closer look. He felt a tightening in his chest, the first stirrings of anger mixed with disbelief. He had lived through situations far more dangerous than this, and yet the misunderstanding here was escalating fast. One officer reached toward the dog, trying to assert authority. The dog barked sharply, more out of protectiveness than aggression, and the moment spiraled. Without warning, a firearm was drawn, a single shot fired. The sound was deafening in the quiet neighborhood. He froze, unable to believe what had just happened. The dog fell to the ground, lifeless. Time seemed to slow. He stared at the scene, shock and grief washing over him in waves. The officers looked at him unsure, guilty, but unable to reverse what had been done. The world felt smaller suddenly, tighter, as if it had constricted around his heart. The bond he had with the dog, built over years of trust and loyalty, had been severed in an instant. He knelt beside the body, trembling with a mix of rage and sorrow. The officers tried to explain, to apologize, but their words sounded hollow, empty, inadequate. The grief was overwhelming, a raw and painful force that consumed him. He had faced death many times, had lost friends and comrades, but this personal, senseless loss, cut deeper than anything he had known. He stood slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled. The grief was present, but so was the restraint he had cultivated over years of training. He could react violently, with skills honed through countless dangerous missions, but he did not. Not yet. He looked at the officers, at the fear and uncertainty in their eyes, and made a choice. He would handle this differently. He would not let tragedy turn into unnecessary violence, not in his quiet life, not yet. But he knew that they had made a mistake, a grave mistake, and there would be consequences. He stepped back into the house, closing the door gently, leaving the officers standing outside. Inside, the silence was thick, filled with memories and echoes of a presence now gone. He sank into a chair, head in his hands, heart heavy. He thought of the mornings, the walks, the quiet companionship that had defined his recent life. All of it was gone, replaced by a searing ache and the realization that his past could never fully be left behind. The instincts he had buried stirred, a reminder that the skills which had kept him alive could also be dangerous if unleashed. The hours passed slowly. He avoided calling the authorities, refusing to escalate the situation unnecessarily. Instead, he focused on details, on evidence, on understanding exactly what had happened. He inspected the yard, noting tire marks, footprints, the positions of the officers when the shot was fired. His mind worked like a precise machine, cataloging information, piecing together the narrative that had led to this tragedy. The grief was still there, but now it was accompanied by clarity, a cold focus that was both comforting and unnerving. Neighbors began to notice the unusual activity. Some asked questions, curious about the commotion, but he offered only vague answers, calm and measured. He did not want to draw attention or invite unnecessary speculation. The quiet of the neighborhood was fragile, and he intended to protect it even as he processed the grief. The dog had been part of his world, and now without it, he felt an emptiness that could not be filled. Yet he maintained control, honoring the memory of the companion that had meant so much. Late in the afternoon, he left the house for a short walk, alone. The streets were quieter now, shadows growing long, the air carrying the scent of earth and fallen leaves. He needed to think, to move, to allow his body to release some of the tension that grief and anger had created. He walked slowly, observing everything around him, aware of sounds, movements, and patterns. His training, dormant but never forgotten, guided him. He was careful, silent, aware of potential threats even in this peaceful neighborhood. The contrast between ordinary life and the past he had survived weighed heavily, a reminder that safety was never guaranteed. Returning home, he sat at the kitchen table, a notebook open before him. He wrote down observations, thoughts, and questions. Who had called the authorities? Why had they acted so quickly and without verification? Could the situation have been handled differently? The act of writing helped organize the storm in his mind, providing a channel for the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. He allowed himself to remember the dog, its loyalty, its joy, the small gestures that had meant so much. The grief was sharp, but clarity was growing alongside it. As night fell, the neighborhood settled into an uneasy quiet. Streetlights glimmered, casting long shadows across the yards. The officers had left, but the memory of what had happened remained, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. He looked out the window, imagining how things could have gone differently. The simple bond between man and dog respected rather than destroyed. The thought of revenge flickered briefly, a dangerous temptation, but he pushed it aside. He knew that restraint did not mean weakness, and that the choices he made now would define him as much as the past had. He spent the evening methodically planning, not for retaliation but for understanding and accountability. He documented everything, noting discrepancies, potential witnesses, and any piece of information that could clarify the incident. His mind worked with precision, turning chaos into order, grief into purpose. Each step was deliberate, controlled, a reflection of the discipline that had kept him alive through years of danger. The emotions were real, raw, but they were guided by intellect and experience rather than impulsive action. The house was silent except for the hum of appliances and the occasional creak of settling wood. He moved through the rooms slowly, touching objects that reminded him of ordinary life, of normalcy, of the peaceful routine that had been shattered. He paused at the dog's bed, kneeling beside it, tracing the contours with his fingers, remembering the softness and warmth. The memory was bittersweet, a mix of love and loss, but it strengthened his resolve. The bond had been strong, unbreakable in life, and now it served as motivation to face the injustice with intelligence and restraint. Sleep was difficult that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying events, analyzing movements, and considering possible outcomes. The grief gnawed at him, but so did the knowledge that the situation could be rectified if handled carefully. He could have unleashed the skills that made him one of the most capable operatives in the country, but he chose not to. Instead, he focused on planning, observing, and preparing for what came next. Restraint, he reminded himself, was also a form of strength. Morning arrived slowly, bringing light and a renewed sense of purpose. He went about his routines, but there was a subtle shift in energy. The grief was still there, but it was now tempered by determination. He would seek answers, ensure accountability, and protect the life he had built, but he would do so in a way that reflected his principles and discipline. The memory of the dog remained, a constant companion in thought and emotion, guiding his actions with the reminder of loyalty, trust, and the simple joys of ordinary life. The neighborhood, unaware of the internal storm that had overtaken the quiet man in their midst, carried on with its routines. Children played, neighbors greeted each other, and the rhythm of daily life persisted. He observed it all, aware of the fragility of peace and the value of calm. He knew that for now his response had to be measured, deliberate, and intelligent. Emotions would fuel clarity rather than chaos, and his actions would honor the memory of the companion who had given him so much joy and comfort. The path forward was uncertain, but he was ready, prepared, and focused, carrying both grief and discipline in equal measure. He sat alone in the dim light of his living room, staring at the empty spot where the dog's bed had been. The silence was heavy, almost unbearable, but he welcomed it because it gave him time to think, to remember, and to plan. The grief that had struck him the day before was still raw, but a deeper awareness had begun to rise. He understood now that this was not just a simple accident or a misjudgment. It was a moment that would test every ounce of restraint, every lesson learned, every skill that had once been necessary to survive in the most dangerous situations on Earth. The past was never far from his mind. He thought back to the years of training, the months that had felt like years, the physical and mental challenges that had pushed him to the edge again and again. The name Delta Force was known by few, but the reputation it carried was immense. He remembered waking up in the dark, running endless drills, carrying weight that felt impossible, surviving obstacles designed to break him. Every lesson, every hardship, every trial had been preparation for a life of danger, for moments when failure was not an option. And yet here he was in a quiet house in a quiet neighborhood, trying to leave that world behind. Or at least he had tried. The missions were sharp in his memory. There were operations in deserts, in dense jungles, in cities he could no longer name without a shiver of remembrance. Every move had to be calculated, every decision potentially life-altering. He had led teams, made split-second choices, and watched comrades fall, often knowing that the responsibility for life and death rested squarely on his shoulders. Those experiences shaped him, forged him into someone capable of precision, patience, and control beyond what most could comprehend. It was a life that demanded sacrifices he would never speak of, rewards that were measured only by survival and mission success. And now those skills were dormant, hidden beneath a layer of civility and routine, waiting quietly for a time when they might be needed again. He walked through the house, touching objects that reminded him of the past, small keepsakes, awards, and letters that no one else would understand. Each one told a story, a fragment of the man he had been and the man he had become. He thought of loyalty, of trust, of the courage that had been required in moments when hesitation meant disaster. Those lessons were not lost on him. They were ingrained, etched into muscle memory, into reflex, into thought patterns that could not be erased. And now, with the loss of his dog, that past began to stir again, demanding attention, reminding him that sometimes ordinary life could not shield one from the pain and injustice of the world. The officers had no idea who they had confronted. They had seen only a man and a dog, unaware of the years of training, the experiences that made him capable of precision and power beyond their understanding. He thought about that with a mixture of irony and frustration. The world saw him as ordinary, calm, disciplined, but it had no sense of the storm that could be unleashed if provoked. He did not want that storm. He wanted justice, but measured, deliberate, and controlled. He would not allow grief to turn into chaos, but he would make sure that the mistake was acknowledged and accounted for. He remembered the first days of training vividly. The instructors had been relentless, pushing him to limits that seemed impossible. They tore him down to build him stronger, to teach him patience, endurance, and clarity under pressure. Every moment of discomfort had been a lesson in self-control, in strategy, and understanding that raw power alone was not enough. The real strength was in knowing when to act, how to act, and the consequences of each choice. He had carried those lessons into every mission, every operation, every moment when lives hung in the balance, and now, those same lessons would guide him in this personal trial. As he sat at the kitchen table, he opened a notebook and began writing, documenting every detail he could recall from the incident. The position of the officers, the sequence of events, the sounds, the movements. He cataloged observations like a meticulous record keeper, knowing that clarity would be essential in resolving the situation. The grief and anger were still there, but they were being channeled into strategy rather than reaction. This was his way of honoring the dog, ensuring that its life and the injustice of its death would not be ignored. The neighbors were unaware of the depth of the events unfolding. To them, he was a quiet man, a neighbor who kept to himself, someone who had experienced a small tragedy. They could not see the history that shaped him, the skills that were dormant but not forgotten, the intelligence and control that were second nature. He felt a protective instinct for both the neighborhood and the memory of his companion. He would navigate this situation carefully, using every tool at his disposal without unnecessary violence. It was a balance he had learned to perfect, a testament to discipline that was both necessary and noble. He spent hours walking through the neighborhood, observing, thinking, planning. Every detail mattered. He noted patterns of movement, the timing of patrols, and the way people reacted to unexpected events. The past had taught him to see patterns, to anticipate behavior, to understand both human and environmental factors in any situation. These observations were not just preparation. They were a way to regain a sense of control, to transform grief into purpose, and to ensure that he acted with precision rather than emotion. The loss of the dog had shaken him, but it had not broken him. It had sharpened his awareness, reminding him of both his strength and his humanity. He reflected on the nature of loyalty and companionship. The dog had been more than a pet. It had been a living reminder of trust, affection, and unconditional support. It had been a quiet witness to the routines and rhythms of his new life, a companion who accepted him fully without judgment or expectation. The absence of that presence was a void, painful and deep, but it also provided clarity. He understood that his actions in the coming days would be a tribute to that bond, a way to honor the loyalty and love that had been so freely given. Memories of missions filled his mind, not as a source of pride but as a reference. Each operation had required strategy, patience, and the ability to adapt to unexpected developments. The principles he had learned then were applicable now: observation, patience, and the careful execution of a plan. He knew that rushing, reacting impulsively, or allowing emotion to dominate would be a mistake. The dog's death was tragic, but his response could define him in a way that preserved integrity, honor, and justice. He spent time reviewing past training exercises in his mind, visualizing sequences and running mental simulations. These were not plans for retaliation. They were exercises in discipline and awareness. He considered every possible angle, every potential mistake, and every opportunity to act intelligently. The skills that had once saved lives now served a different purpose, guiding him through grief, injustice, and the challenge of confronting the reality of those who had wronged him, intentionally or not. The focus on precision, control, and thoughtful action was a form of respect, both for the past and for the present. Evenings were spent quietly at home. He lit a single lamp and allowed the room to glow softly, a comforting presence in the darkness. He pored over notes, reflected on memories, and allowed himself brief moments of emotion before returning to the structured planning that had become his method of coping. He knew that grief was important, but so was clarity. He balanced both, honoring the dog, his own values, and the discipline that defined him. There was a quiet strength in this balance, a testament to a life lived with both danger and control. He thought about accountability and responsibility. The officers had acted without full understanding, and their mistake had consequences. He was not seeking revenge in a way that would create more chaos or suffering. He wanted justice, acknowledgement, and correction. He understood the power he possessed, but he also understood the importance of restraint. The balance between action and morality, between strength and humanity, was delicate but essential. It was a principle he had carried through years of intense, dangerous operations, and it would guide him now. He remembered the moments when his training had felt unbearable, the times he had questioned whether he could continue, but those moments had built him, shaped him, and taught him the value of patience, endurance, and focus. Now those lessons were being applied in a different context, but the principles remained the same. Every action, every observation, every choice mattered. He had learned that mistakes could be fatal, that impulsiveness could destroy lives, and that discipline was the key to both survival and justice. As the night deepened, he felt a quiet resolve. The world outside his home was unaware of the storm that had been building within him, of the depth of skill, knowledge, and experience that lay just beneath the surface. He was ready to act, but only with purpose, only with precision, and only in a way that reflected his values. The grief for the dog remained, a powerful reminder of loyalty and love, but it was now coupled with clarity, focus, and a commitment to act intelligently. He went to bed with a mind alert but calm, the first hints of determination replacing raw grief. The past was never far from his thoughts, and the skills he had honed over years were ready, waiting for the right moment. He understood that the situation would require both strategy and patience, that the choices he made now would shape the outcomes to come. The bond with the dog had been deep, transformative, and his actions would honor that bond, not through impulsive rage, but through careful, deliberate measures. Morning came, bringing with it the clarity of purpose. He moved through the house with quiet efficiency, every action measured, every step deliberate. The memories of the past provided guidance, the grief of the present provided motivation, and the discipline of a lifetime provided control. He knew that he was about to navigate a challenge that required both intelligence and restraint, that the situation with the authorities had set into motion a series of events that would test him in ways ordinary life never could, and he was ready, prepared, and determined, carrying with him the lessons, skills, and loyalty that defined not just the operative he had been, but the man he had become. He woke early, the weight of the previous days pressing down on him. The neighborhood was quiet, almost deceptively peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But he knew better. The memory of the dog, the officer's misjudgment, and the injustice lingered in his mind, sharp and unrelenting. He moved through his house with precision, preparing for a day that would demand focus, patience, and keen observation. Breakfast was simple, just as it always had been, but his mind was far from ordinary thoughts. He was planning, calculating, anticipating. Outside, the streets were calm, children on their way to school, neighbors beginning their routines. To anyone looking, everything seemed normal, but he walked with a different awareness now, every sound, shadow, and movement analyzed. He noted the patterns of cars, the timing of people walking, and the small details that revealed normal behavior versus potential irregularities. His training, dormant for so long, had become active again, guiding him in ways that ordinary civilians could not perceive. The loss of the dog had awakened a side of him that had remained hidden, the side that demanded precision and attention. He started by documenting everything he could remember from the incident. He wrote detailed accounts, sketching diagrams of the yard, marking positions of people and noting timing. Every word, every line was deliberate, ensuring that he could reconstruct the events clearly in his mind. The process was not just for clarity. It was a way to regain a sense of control, to channel the grief and frustration into focused energy. The dog's presence lingered in every thought, every observation, reminding him of loyalty, trust, and the consequences of misunderstandings. Once his notes were complete, he began to consider the authorities themselves. He observed their routines from a distance, noticing the vehicles, patterns of patrol, and interactions with the neighborhood. They had acted without full understanding, but that did not excuse the impact of their actions. He knew that accountability was necessary, but he also knew that a careless approach could create more chaos. Every step had to be measured, every observation precise. He felt the familiar clarity that came with preparation, a focus that had been honed over years of high-stakes missions. Neighbors occasionally waved as he walked past, unaware of the storm brewing within him. To them, he was the quiet man who had recently suffered a loss, perhaps grieving in solitude. They did not see the analytical mind at work, the trained awareness scanning the environment for patterns and inconsistencies. He noted conversations from a distance, snippets of information that could be useful later, but he maintained his calm demeanor. Patience was key, and he had mastered it in ways that most could not imagine. The ability to wait, observe, and act at the precise moment was what had kept him alive through countless operations. He visited the scene of the incident carefully, noting details that could clarify the situation. Tire marks, footprints, and scuff marks were cataloged mentally, every piece of information stored for later analysis. He considered the positioning of the officers, the likely thought process that led to their action, and the potential for miscommunication. Each detail added to the larger picture, allowing him to form a clear understanding of what had happened. The process was both practical and emotional, a way to honor the dog's memory while preparing for the steps he would need to take next. Throughout the day, he maintained a balance between observation and routine. He cooked meals, cleaned the house, and performed exercises that kept both his body and mind sharp. Discipline had always been central to his life, and he relied on it now more than ever. Even as grief tugged at his heart, the structure he maintained prevented him from acting impulsively. He understood the consequences of rash action, and he respected the principle that strategy must always guide execution. In the afternoon, He made contact with a few discreet sources in the area, people who could provide insight without drawing attention. He asked careful questions, listening more than speaking, gathering information about the officers' schedules, past behavior, and any potential missteps. He was methodical, patient, and deliberate, ensuring that every piece of information was accurate and relevant. The process reminded him of past operations, where small details often made the difference between success and failure. He applied the same rigor here, treating the investigation with the seriousness it deserved. Evening approached, and he returned home to review his findings. The information was scattered but valuable. Patterns emerged, inconsistencies became apparent, and a clearer understanding of the events developed. He documented everything meticulously, knowing that organization and clarity were essential. The grief remained, but it was joined by determination and purpose. The dog's memory motivated him, reminding him that action needed to be measured, intelligent, and precise. He was not seeking chaos. He was seeking resolution. Nightfall brought a different kind of awareness. The neighborhood was quiet, streetlights casting long shadows, and the air was filled with the sounds of nocturnal life. He observed carefully from his window, noting movements and patterns, anticipating interactions, and preparing mentally for the next steps. The skills that had once saved lives were now serving him in a different context, guiding him through a challenge that was personal, emotional, and consequential. The clarity of purpose sharpened his senses, allowing him to see what others could not. Every shadow, sound, and movement was analyzed, cataloged, and considered. He reviewed contingency plans in his mind, imagining different scenarios, potential reactions, and appropriate responses. These were not plans for aggression. They were exercises in preparation, ensuring that he could act intelligently and effectively if necessary. The balance between grief and strategy was delicate, but he maintained it with the precision of someone who had lived through far greater dangers. The process was therapeutic, channeling intense emotions into focused thought, and it strengthened his resolve. Late into the night, he reflected on loyalty, trust, and justice. The dog had been a loyal companion, offering comfort and companionship without expectation. Its loss was a profound personal blow, but it also provided clarity about values and priorities. He understood that justice did not require vengeance. It required intelligence, patience, and moral discipline. He honored the memory of the dog by committing to act with integrity, ensuring that every step was measured, deliberate, and appropriate. The following morning, he set out again to observe and document. Every detail mattered: interactions between officers, changes in patterns, and signs of awareness about the previous incident. He noted behavior that indicated caution or guilt, behavior that revealed routine, and behavior that suggested misunderstanding or error. Each observation added to his mental map, providing insight that would guide his next steps. His mind worked like a machine, cataloging, analyzing, and predicting outcomes with precision. The discipline he had learned, in the most dangerous operations of his life now, guided his actions in the pursuit of clarity and accountability. He reached out discreetly to neighbors who had witnessed parts of the incident, gathering first-hand accounts without revealing his full intentions. He listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and documented responses. The information helped him reconstruct the event with increasing accuracy. It was painstaking work, but he understood its importance. Accuracy and clarity were his tools, just as much as any skill or training he had received in the past. The dog's memory inspired meticulous care, ensuring that the pursuit of understanding honored the loyalty and love that had been lost. As the day progressed, he observed interactions between local law enforcement and the community, noting subtle behaviors, small errors, and signs of miscommunication. He pieced together timelines, compared observations, and developed a clear understanding of the dynamics at play. Each step was deliberate, guided by training and experience, but also informed by grief and personal loss. The balance between emotion and strategy was delicate, but he maintained it with precision, allowing him to approach the situation thoughtfully and effectively. Evening returned, and he reflected on the day's work. Progress had been made, insights gained, and understanding deepened. He reviewed notes, sketched diagrams, and formulated questions that would guide further investigation. The process was rigorous, disciplined, and methodical, transforming grief into purposeful action. He understood that the situation would require patience, intelligence, and moral clarity. Impulsiveness was not an option. Careful, deliberate measures were essential. He allowed himself a moment of stillness, thinking about the dog, the bond they had shared, and the lessons learned from loss. The grief was still powerful, but it was now coupled with determination and strategic focus. Every observation, every note, and every plan was guided by the memory of loyalty and companionship. He knew that the steps he took next would define not only the outcome of the situation, but also the integrity with which he acted. He honored the past, the present, and the dog's memory through careful, thoughtful action. Night deepened, and he prepared for another cycle of observation and analysis. The neighborhood was quiet, but his mind was alert, scanning for patterns, inconsistencies, and opportunities. His skills, once dormant, were fully engaged, guiding him with precision and clarity. The dog's presence, though gone, remained a powerful motivator, shaping his approach with lessons of loyalty, trust, and love. He moved through the night with purpose, balancing grief and strategy, emotion and intellect, preparing for the next steps in a process that would require patience, intelligence, and unwavering discipline. As the first light of dawn approached, he reflected on the progress made. The path forward was becoming clearer, each observation, note, and insight bringing him closer to understanding the incident fully. The memory of the dog was intertwined with purpose, guiding every action, every thought, and every decision. He was ready to navigate the challenges ahead, prepared to act with precision, intelligence, and moral clarity. The loss remained, but it had been transformed into focus, determination, and strategy, ensuring that the memory of loyalty and companionship would guide him toward resolution and justice. He woke to another quiet morning, but the air felt heavier now, filled with the weight of responsibility and determination. The days of grief, observation, and meticulous planning had brought him closer to understanding the events that had unfolded, and now it was time to act, not with uncontrolled anger, not with impulsive decisions, but with intelligence, precision, and a sense of moral clarity that had defined his life both in service and in quiet civilian existence. The dog's memory burned brightly in his mind, a guide and a reminder of loyalty, trust, and love that deserved respect. He moved through the house with calm efficiency, making coffee, preparing for the day, and reviewing his notes one last time. Every detail mattered. The sequence of events, the officer's routines, and the patterns he had observed over the past days. He had reconstructed the incident fully in his mind and in writing. He understood the causes, the misjudgments, and the consequences. The next steps required strategy and clarity, the application of skills that had once been used in life or death situations, now tempered by a deep respect for justice and restraint. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Morning routines continued as usual, but he moved with heightened awareness. Every sound, every movement, and every interaction was noticed and processed. He had learned to read people, to understand intent and emotion from subtle cues. Today, that skill would guide him not toward violence, but toward resolution. His approach was deliberate, calculated, and careful, reflecting the discipline that had carried him through the most dangerous experiences of his past. He approached the authorities in a calm, measured way, requesting a meeting to discuss the incident. His tone was controlled, firm, yet not threatening. They were surprised at his composure, unaware of the depth of skill and experience behind the quiet man before them. He presented his observations clearly, laying out the facts, the sequence of events, and the consequences of their actions. There was no anger in his words, only clarity and an expectation of responsibility. The officers listened, slowly realizing the impact of their actions and the meticulous understanding the man had of what had occurred. The conversation was tense, but civil. He maintained control over the dialogue, allowing no room for distraction, deflection, or avoidance. Every question he asked was precise, every point made with evidence and reasoning. The officers responded with apologies, explanations, and acknowledgement of error. He accepted their words, but he also emphasized accountability, ensuring that they understood the importance of proper conduct, careful observation, and respect for life. The goal was not revenge. It was justice, clarity, and correction. After the meeting, he reflected on the outcome. The officers had understood the gravity of their mistake, the human cost of their actions, and the responsibility they bore. He had achieved resolution through discipline, observation, and strategy rather than aggression. The grief remained, but it was transformed now into a sense of closure, a recognition that measured action could honor loyalty and trust more than any impulsive reaction ever could. The dog's memory had guided him through this process, ensuring that his actions were deliberate, thoughtful, and principled. He returned home and walked through the house slowly, touching objects that reminded him of the dog. Every memory was a connection to the bond they had shared, the loyalty and love that had shaped his quiet life. He allowed himself to feel the grief fully, but without letting it control him. He sat in the yard, imagining the dog's presence, remembering the joy of its companionship and acknowledging the pain of its absence. In this reflection, he found peace and strength, a way to honor what had been lost without succumbing to bitterness or anger. The days that followed were spent restoring balance to his life. He maintained routines, exercises, and small rituals that provided structure and focus. The grief had not vanished, but it had been tempered by clarity, understanding, and a sense of justice. He engaged with neighbors more openly, though always with care and discretion, recognizing the value of community and ordinary life. The memory of the dog remained central to his motivation, shaping his interactions and guiding his sense of responsibility. He also reflected deeply on the nature of authority, responsibility, and the consequences of actions. The officers had acted without full understanding, but he had shown them through example and evidence the importance of awareness, patience, and careful decision-making. His approach demonstrated that skill and discipline were not solely tools of combat or survival. They were principles that could guide justice, resolve conflicts, and protect the bonds of trust and loyalty that formed the foundation of human connection. In private moments, he allowed himself to relive memories of the dog, its playful energy, its loyalty, and its comfort during quiet evenings at home. These recollections were bittersweet, but they provided motivation to live intentionally, to honor loyalty, and to maintain the integrity of his actions. The grief and love intertwined, creating a sense of purpose and reinforcing the values he held dear. He understood that the strength of bonds, even with a pet, could define actions and guide moral clarity in difficult situations. He also reflected on the skills and training that had defined much of his life. The discipline, observation, and strategic thinking honed through years of service were now applied in a different arena. He used them to navigate human behavior, assess accountability, and ensure that actions were fair, measured, and principled. The past had shaped him, but it did not dominate him. He chose how to apply those lessons, balancing intelligence with morality, grief with strategy, and loss with purpose. As he moved through his home, he created spaces to honor the dog's memory. Small areas of the yard were tended carefully, objects placed thoughtfully, and moments of reflection integrated into his daily routines. These acts were not just sentimental. They were a demonstration of respect, continuity, and intentional living. The dog's life had meaning beyond its years, influencing behavior, shaping character, and reinforcing the importance of loyalty and care in a world that could sometimes be harsh and unforgiving. Neighbors began to notice a change in him, not in temperament, but in presence. He was calm, disciplined, and focused, yet approachable. He maintained boundaries while engaging in community life, balancing privacy with connection. The tragedy had been transformative, but it had not diminished his humanity. Instead, it had reinforced his understanding of loyalty, responsibility, and measured action. His interactions reflected integrity, empathy, and careful thought, demonstrating the enduring impact of experience and the capacity for growth even after loss. Weeks passed, and the situation with the authorities settled. Policies were reviewed, practices were clarified, and understanding was established. He maintained a discreet oversight, ensuring that accountability remained active, but he did not seek confrontation beyond what was necessary. Justice had been achieved through intelligence, observation, and moral clarity, not aggression. The memory of the dog guided this approach, ensuring that every step honored the bond they had shared.